Does God use Satan for his purpose? It's an important question that Christians have debated for centuries. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Don, and this is Life as God Intended. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Push that notification bell so you don't miss a video every time I upload one. And as always, I appreciate you sharing these with your friends so that they may be encouraged and edified in their walk with the Lord. And don't forget to leave your comments below relative to this discussion. I would love to hear from you and interact with you about this particular question. Does God use Satan for his purpose? Well, when we think of trials, troubles, or tribulations, we often think first of Job. The scriptures show that Job certainly endured his share of what the Apostle Paul referred to and called light and momentary troubles in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verses 16 to 18. Now, I'm sure that Job, as well as we would maybe particularly argue with Paul about the light and momentary troubles that we face, but that's for another discussion, another broadcast, which I've talked about. So go look for that one on 2 Corinthians 4, 16 to 18. What may God be doing in our lives during these times of problems and troubles? Certainly there's something going on. Obviously, we would acknowledge that the devil is up to no good, attempting to kill, steal, and destroy. But what about God? Does he have anything to do with the issues that we face in our lives? Well, we learn some significant insight into these questions as we read the book of Job. In chapter 1, in verses 6 through 10, here's what it says. Now there was a day when the sons of God, those were obviously angels, came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" And then Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land." End of quote. It's obvious from this scripture that Satan was upset that God had put a hedge around Job to protect Job's person, his health, to protect Job's house, his family, and to protect Job's wealth. And these were the very three items that Satan ultimately attacked in Job's lives, and that he attempts to attack in ours as well. So the question remains, does God use Satan for his purpose? Well, as we keep reading, verse 12 tells us of God's purpose. Then the Lord said to Job, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him." So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. End of quote. So from verse 12, we have to ask another question. It's kind of a follow-up to our main question for this particular broadcast. Who set Job up for all his problems? Well, God did. Notice in verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" So, does God set us up, even orchestrate trials, pain, suffering in our lives? Some people think not. In fact, I heard a preacher say recently, now we know that God does not cause pain and suffering in our lives. Oh, really? Let's take a closer look at what the scripture says. Because in Job chapter 12 and verse 5, Job himself, in response to his so-called counselors. Now you have to remember, this is after Job experienced significant, yes, life-threatening, up to the point of taking his life, but his life couldn't be taken by Satan, but he wished he could die. He actually cursed the day he was born. He never cursed God, but he cursed the day he was born because he was suffering so much physically. He had 7 children and grandchildren. They were all killed in one day, and all of his wealth was taken away in one day. So Job, in the midst of all this pain and suffering and trial, says in verse 5 of chapter 12 to the counselors, to his buddies, to his friends that came and gave him the wrong kind of counsel, which is so interesting. When you need someone to stand with you, often Job's comforters are there, and they're not necessarily encouraging you. They're necessarily blaming you for the dilemma that you find yourself in. But anyway, in response to Job's comforters, Job said this, quote, "He who is at ease holds calamity in contempt." Another way of saying the same thing is the way the Amplified Bible reads. He who is at ease has contempt for misfortune. It sounds like Job is warning us to be careful about how we reflect on the suffering and the trials and the problems that we face. Oftentimes, I hear Christians attributing that exclusively to what Satan's up to, with no appreciation that God may in fact be using it in their lives. Job also declared in chapter 2 and verse 10, "Shall we accept good from God and not accept adversity?" That's the word of Scripture. In fact, we see in Job chapter 2 and verse 9 that even Job's wife suggests, "Curse God and die." Now, she wasn't a very helpful wife, but she did know the source of Job's calamity. What's most important here is Job realizing that God was at work, even though admitting that Satan was taking his best shot at Job to take him out. God was ultimately in control and working his purpose in Job's life. Little personal aside, I remember this year of 2023, January 2nd, the second day of the year, the official New Year's celebration, I was riding my bike when a car crashed into me and rode part of me over, and I broke 15 ribs, broken clavicle, terribly broken up arm, 2 punctured lungs, my lungs filling up with blood, spent 23 days in the hospital and almost died. And through that, I recognized, yeah, Satan was taking his best shot to take me out, even in the hospitals, but God was in control. And so I received it from the hand of the Lord and allowed him to walk me through that time. And I have been so encouraged and blessed by what he's accomplished in my life because I saw his work of grace during that time. And that is why Job could say in chapter 6 and verse 10, "I rejoice in unsparing pain." I remember once the ambulance finally got me to the emergency room that day on January 6th, and I was in excruciating pain. In fact, I thought I was crossing over into heaven, and my children cried out and said, "Dad, don't leave us." And I said, I'm not suicidal. I'm ready to go if this is the time. And I remember the Lord clearly saying, "Don, this isn't your time. I'll tell you what time this is. This is a time for you to enter into my pain. I want you to begin to see this as my opportunity for you. And instead of trying to escape this, I want you to embrace this." That's what Job realized in Job chapter 6 and verse 10. He said, "I rejoice in unsparing pain." Even Job's brothers and sisters knew the source of his suffering and pain and consoled him for all the adversities that the Lord had brought upon him. You can look it up. It's Job 42:11. You see, in the midst of all his troubles and the poor advice from others, including his wife, Job managed to cross the line by faith, to entrust himself to God's grace, thereby to experience the weight of glory, even rejoicing in his circumstances, negative though they were. And that is why, in spite of all that Job went through, he is best known for his statement in Job 13 and verse 15. Quote, "Though he, God, slay me, yet will I trust him." End of quote. Job's final confession was that no purpose of God could be thwarted. Job 42 and verse 2. So when the trials of life come our way, as they will, remember, God is ultimately at work to accomplish his purpose in our lives. No wonder Peter is recorded as saying in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 12 and 13, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation." Well, that might be a different way of looking at the trials and the troubles and the tribulations that you're currently facing. But if you begin to realize that God's at work, it's not just Satan taking his best shot, but it's God reforming you and conforming you to his image, and that he might glorify himself through you, you'll find comfort in his grace. Thanks again for tuning in today and for liking this video and sharing it with your friends. Until next time, it's my prayer for you that you will experience life as God intended.